What is up, everybody? We are back after, I have to believe, Ryan, that was our longest hiatus since last summer, maybe last off season somewhere. We ended up getting, I was planning to come back with a show last week, but I thought, you know what, let's breathe a little bit. We're kind of turning the page to the draft. I needed a couple extra days to really, sink my teeth into this thing. And I feel like I'm finally at a place with this draft class where I can talk intelligently about it. So he's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. We are going to get into some fun questions here as we begin to kind of set the table over the next couple of weeks. We're going to have a lot of fun draft conversations. We're going to start with a couple here tonight. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great, and you're right. It feels like it's been a while, so happy to be back in the saddle and talking Bills football.
Speaking about being back in the saddle, we are going to mount up once again at Wingnuts in a couple of weeks here. Set your calendar, set the date, save the date. It is April 15th. It is 6 p.m. We'll probably start the show at around 7:30. So plan for that. It's going to be our NFL draft preview spectacular. And we're bringing in a big guest that we're excited about, Joe Buscaglia from The Athletic. He is going to come help us break this thing down. And we're going to do something fun, Ryan. We're going to take 4 predetermined outcomes of the draft, mock outcomes. And then we are going to debate it. And as a panel, come to the one that we think makes the most sense for the Bills. We're going to put a little time into, the pre-show process, figuring out what those scenarios are. And we're going to come with our best arguments. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. Big guest, literally and figuratively. Joe towers over us. We're going to have to figure out that video situation, how to get it so all of us are on screen. So looking forward to Wingnuts, though, April 15th.
That is a great point. It will be fun. We have an announcement to make that night. There's going to be great food and drinks as always. Wingnuts at 700 Military Road in North Buffalo. You are not going to want to miss this thing. It's going to be a super fun time. So we got a couple things to get to tonight. Let me set the table real quick. There's a couple of things. First and foremost, the linebacker conversation at number 27. There's a couple of interesting names to discuss and whether or not that position should even be in play at that position. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Ryan put up a story, I think last week or over the weekend, Darnell Wright, top tackle prospect. He coming to Buffalo for a top 30 visit. We want to get into that position a little bit because I think if you're just kind of getting into this thing, tackle might not be completely on your radar, but it's an interesting position to ponder. Then you have a nice little tidbit on top 30 visits that we'll get to as well. And then, of course, Cole Beasley, very active on social media. Once again, he had some comments about Gabe Davis. I wanted to just toss that around, ping pong it around, if you will. But let's start on Campbell. And I put up a story. I was listening to the Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks podcast from last week. And a really good nugget from Jeremiah is that coming off of the combine over the last month, he has heard 2 different people say to him, don't be surprised if there's a marriage between Jack Campbell and Buffalo late in the first round. That is the linebacker out of Iowa. Him and Bucky kind of tossed it around a little bit. Bucky said like the leadership piece, the athletic profile, a lot of the, what Jack Campbell brings to the table is a fit for the Bills, what McDermott likes to do, what Brandon Beane looks for. And then also a guy you're going to ask a rookie to come in here and call this defense. That's a piece of it that I think we could talk about as well. But they added another layer to this, Ryan. Luke Kuechly, who has been in Buffalo the last 2 off seasons to work with the linebacking group in Buffalo. Sean McDermott was his DC in Carolina. He is training Jack Campbell this offseason. So I don't think that there's a top 30 visit scheduled for him, but it's interesting because if they really want to know about the player, I'm not sure there's many people, like Daniel Jeremiah said, that Sean McDermott trusts more than Luke Kuechly.
Yeah, first and foremost, when it comes to the top 30 visits, that could change at any point in time, Matt. So they could call up this week and try to get something scheduled. So as of right now, though, it has not been reported that Campbell is coming to Buffalo. But when you and I were talking about this yesterday, You said it. The Bills have Luke Kuechly on speed dial, and I'm sure it works both ways. I'm sure Luke Kuechly could be sitting there training this guy saying, wow, the athletic profile, the need in Buffalo, knowing how good he could be in Sean McDermott's defense. I'm sure there have been conversations had where wait till you get a look at this guy, look at the tape, this, that, or the other. I'm sure that from an interest perspective, he makes a lot of sense to the Bills.
Yeah. Do we like the idea and the fit for the player? I mean, I think there's probably two players in this range that we have to talk about, right? Drew Sanders from Arkansas, and obviously Jack Campbell from Iowa, the two top, interior linebackers in this class. And I think depending on what you're looking for, they're different flavors. Campbell is more of that. He's been a middle linebacker. He's called the defense. They rave about him as a leader, all those kinds of things. The Dick Butkus Award winner. But Sanders, I think, has a little bit better of an athletic profile. He went to Alabama first, was an edge rusher. They changed him over once he transferred schools, and he was really good especially as a blitzer. I mean, he spends a lot of time in the defensive back or in the offensive backfield, tackles for a loss, sacks, all those kinds of, the splash plays. I think you probably prefer Sanders and what he's put together in his one season at Arkansas. But let's get into the conversation of which player do you think is a better fit? And then also, is that the route to go for the Bills at 27?
I'm not sure if I can sit here today and tell you which one's a better fit because I think they both match from a athletic profile. Campbell, he was an athletic freak according to the RAS score that he had. I think it was a 9.98, somewhere in that range out of 10. So he's fine. Obviously, as an athlete, he's a guy that can do the coverage better than I think what some people thought maybe coming out. And then you mentioned the Arkansas linebacker too. I mean, both guys make a lot of sense for what the Bills need, what they're missing on this defense after losing Edmonds. I'm just not sure I love the idea of taking a linebacker in round one. We can get more into that in terms of what we were talking about pre-show. I just don't know if that's going to truly be the best player available when the Bills get on the clock late in round one.
And that's the interesting part of this every year is when we're talking about these positions, linebacker, running back, you almost take, like, say there's not a first round grade on any of the linebackers. And Matt Miller from ESPN actually put out a piece, I think 4 days ago, I thought was really good. He came up with 20 players that he has a first round grade on. And I'll read them through them here because I think it's a fun exercise. The quarterbacks, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. I will say that there's a lot of juice around the Tennessee quarterback. What's his name again?
Hendon
Hooker.
Hooker.
Yeah, he is trending all of a sudden. Could end up being a first round pick. If you want to throw his name into the mix, that's one that is interesting as well. Bijan Robinson, the running back. Jackson Smith in Jigba, Jordan Addison. Interestingly enough, he didn't have a first round grade on Zay Flowers. Only one tight end, Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. 3 tackles, Peter Skoronski, Broderick Jones, Paris Johnson Jr., and then 5 edge rushers, Will Anderson Jr., Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, Miles Murphy out of Clemson, Jalen Carter, obviously the interior defensive lineman out of Georgia, and then 3 cornerbacks, Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, and Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State. That's it. And so 0 linebackers with a first round grade. So I get the natural instinct to then say, if you're a fan and you don't think the value is there for the player, all right, trade out of that spot, right? Trade back, accumulate draft capital. If Brandon Beane can pull off a deal, I think that makes a ton of sense, especially if the first 25-ish picks goes the way that most experts expect it to go. And there's not a real slam dunk, run the paper to the podium type of pick. The problem is, Ryan, there needs to be somebody at the other end of the line willing to trade up for a specific player. And that player might not be there because there might be such a big pool of players that teams have similar grades on.
Yeah. And what it's going to come down to with the trade down option, in my opinion, is a team that maybe, I don't want to say misses out on a quarterback in round one, but maybe there was a better player available to them. And maybe they want to trade back into the end of round one, though, to get a Levis or a hooker. I've actually seen Levis fall out of round 1 in a few mock drafts recently, which is a little surprising. But, last year Malik Willis was a first-round pick in a lot of mock drafts, and then you saw where he fell to. So you just never know with mock drafts in terms of how accurate they'll be at the end of the day compared to the actual draft. But hypothetically, if there's a team that goes with a defensive star or another need in round 1, and then they want to get one of those quarterbacks, because it's valuable to take a quarterback in round 1 because of that 5th-year option, as you know. Maybe that's the golden ticket, so to speak, for the Bills to trade down. Is there's one of those teams that say, we want to get Hooker at the end of round 1. Bills say, well, that's perfect. You can get the 5th round or the 5th-year option. We can move down, acquire more picks, because only 6 picks in this draft class, which is pretty light for Brandon Beane. Especially knowing what he said about this year being tight to the cap, next year being tight to the cap. He probably wants to acquire a few extra picks if possible. So that might be the best case scenario for this team. But you're right. It takes 2 to tango. Going back to the linebacker conversation, because you just mentioned Matt Miller, he also put out a really interesting tweet today, too, about there's all this talk about don't draft a running back in round 1. But he said you could say the same for linebackers. And he went all the way back to 2015, Matt. And I'll read through some of these names last year. And some of these are inside linebackers. Some are off-ball linebackers. Quay Walker, Devin Lloyd, Zaven Collins, Jamin Davis, Isaiah Simmons, Kenneth Murray, Jordan Brooks, Patrick Queen, Devin White, Devin Bush, Raquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds, Leighton Vander Esch, Rashaan Evans, Gerard Davis, Reuben Foster, Duron Lee, and Stephon Anthony. Not a lot of hits there. There's a few, but there's also quite a few misses, quite a few players that bounced around the league, some that are out of the league, obviously. I'm not sure if you're getting that value in round 1 taking a linebacker. Now, that said, every linebacker is different. They might fall in love with one of the 2 players that we mentioned. Drew Sanders, or it could be Jack Campbell, and maybe he is one of them is a perfect fit for this system, can come right in and call the defense, which that's another challenge in itself. But there's definitely some question marks in terms of taking a linebacker in round 1.
Yeah, and I think that, we'll probably do a show specifically geared around, okay, who are the trade back targets? I just ran a quick mock draft, which is so fun this time of year, right? We're going through all the different simulators and really starting to kind of charge this thing up. And the first trade that comes up is Carolina, and you'd have to move back. I think it's to like 39, and then you could add an additional 3rd round pick in the deal, something around that. Or Detroit, who has 2 second-round picks, get both of those, and so you move back and you get an additional player. And see, that's the other problem, or kind of baked in here, is if you go best player available at 27 and it doesn't end up being a linebacker, and you're Brandon Beane and you're dead set on getting that guy, I think Sanders and Campbell, you're gonna have a tough time getting them at where the Bills pick at that second, because that there's going to be a run at the position at some point, right? Like other positions are going to get picked a little bit more dry in terms of the top tier of that spot. We see it every year. We saw it in last year's draft. And I think that's one of the reasons that Brandon Beane had to kind of, didn't know what to do almost, like, trading, no guys that he wanted weren't there when he got to his pick. And there was a couple guys that he thought, all right, we moved back a couple spots. They ended up ultimately getting James Cook, but I think that's a dangerous spot to be in as well. So it's like, there's how the Bills approach the trade game in this one. I'm very intrigued to see how that plays out.
Yeah, they might go in, Matt, with a strategy saying, well, if our top whatever players are off the board, all their players with the 1st round grade, because you mentioned 4 quarterbacks on that list. They're not going to be on Buffalo's board in terms of, someone that they're going to realistically draft. So they might be looking at 15 players, 16 players with a 1st round grade. And if they're all gone, trading down might be what they're hoping for. But maybe one of those players hangs around until 20, 21. And then all of a sudden the conversation shifts entirely to, should we trade up and get this guy? Like they did last year with Kaiir Elam. Elam, they said, was the last player that they had a 1st round grade on. My gut feeling is they were all aboard the Trent McDuffie train. And when McDuffie was traded up, and when the Chiefs traded up to get McDuffie, I think they kind of panicked a little bit too, traded up to get Kaiir Elam. So you never know. Like, that's the beauty of this draft, that you can go in with a game plan saying, we're more likely to do trade down than trade up or vice versa. But as the picks start coming in, rolling in, everything changes in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, and if you go over to, I think Lance Zierlein does a really good job over at NFL.com. He's got a nice profile. He'll put at the top. All the numbers are kind of listed out. They do a production score, an athleticism score, and then a total score. The total score for all linebackers, Drew Sanders gets an 86. Jack Campbell is 82. So those 1-2, right? Now, if you go to the athletic score, Drew Sanders didn't participate in the combine. Jack Campbell did, and he crushed it. He gets an 89. Then you go to the production score, 86 for Drew Sanders and only a 74 for Jack Campbell. So that's going to be interesting to see. I think both of these guys, one of the pros to their games is they're rangy, which I think any player they look at to fill that middle linebacker role, they're going to be able to have to play sideline to sideline, especially against some of the high profile offenses that they play against. I don't know. Like we'll see when it comes to one of the things that I'm concerned about in the Jack Campbell scouting report is lacking desired short area burst in pursuit. Which means like reactivity, right? Like if a guy gets a pass over the middle, is he going to be able to react quick enough, especially as a rookie? Like we talk so much about these young players being able to come in and contribute right away. There's going to be so much on the plate of a potential rookie middle linebacker. I mean, we saw, Terrell Bernard thrown out there weeks into the season at will linebacker and how much he struggled in that spot. He was a 3rd-round draft pick. So you're really, I think if you're the Bills and you make this pick at 27, you're going to have to really believe in it.
Yeah, you're going to have to believe in it. You're going to also have to have maybe a plan in place in terms of calling the plays. Are you really going to trust a rookie to do that? And it's not to say that they're not capable of doing it, but do you pass it along to Milano, let him do the play calling, even though he is not, the traditional spot where you do that? I don't know. But you're right. There's so much on the plate of a rookie if they're coming in, they're going to be contributing. If it's a linebacker, they're going to be contributing in a big time way. We've talked about the internal in-house options for the Bills, from Terrell Bernard to Tyrell Dodson to Balin Spector. Those guys may end up being the week 1 starter, but if the Bills go first round with one of these 2 prospects that we've been talking about tonight, in my mind, I don't see how they're not starting week 1.
Washington State's, I see a comment here on YouTube. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the show as well. One guy that, we had Chris Trapasso on a while back, and he really sang the praises of Diane Henley, linebacker out of Washington State, a little bit smaller. He doesn't fit the size profile of Edmonds and Campbell, and even Drew Sanders, who isn't as heavy. He's still a 6'4", kind of on the taller end. Diane Henley, 6 foot, 225 pounds. A guy that former wide receiver that from a coverage perspective, I think that's where teams really like him in this draft, but he's another name to kind of keep an eye on. And after that, it's going to kind of be a crapshoot. Again, this is a position that I don't feel like teams are, from what I've heard at the combine, aren't overly wowed about. A couple other names out there. Noah Sewell, from the linebacker from Oregon, kind of a throwback type of guy, can do a little bit of everything. He is the brother of Penei Sewell, who went in the first round a couple years ago. And then another name that I've heard kind of thrown around, and this might have been in one of your mock drafts, Dorian Williams, linebacker out of Tulane.
Yeah, I don't think he was in my mock, but definitely a popular name in a lot of the mocks that I've seen for someone that you can get in those middle rounds or day 2 type of picks. So I just think that the Bills, if Brandon Beane is the way he's been since taking over here, they're going to go best player available. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be linebacker, because there's some tackles that could fall into their laps. There's some receivers we can talk about. This is a very deep tight end class. I think there's going to be a few tight ends that might be higher on their board in terms of grading and other positions as well. So it's going to be interesting to watch and see how it all unfolds here in April.
I feel like this is like a little sidebar, but I feel like all of the draft analysts are like biting their lip when they're talking about the comp for Dalton Kincaid. Like, I feel like everybody wants to kind of talk about the Travis Kelce in him, but nobody really wants to use the comp because Kelce is such a unicorn. But I sometimes wonder, like you mentioned, like some of the tight ends that might have high grades for the Bills board. And I know that they just re-signed Dawson Knox to an extension, but watching Travis Kelce up close and personal, if they can get another version of that, and Kincaid, who wasn't one of the guys that had a first round grade on Matt Miller's board, if he's kind of there and he might be like that tweener. I like what Dane Brugler does. If maybe it's not a first round grade, but if he's really close, he'll give him a first, second. Maybe Dalton Kincaid falls into that group. And how much would you like the Bills to maybe think about an idea like that, adding another weapon as a pass catcher? And that's what Kincaid is. I mean, most people think that he's going to be an immediate pass catching weapon.
Yeah, and that's a great option for the Bills. There's the throwback to like the Michael Mayer that you mentioned, who has a first round grade. Someone that's not going to wow you with his athleticism, but it's like, one, having an extra offensive lineman out there on the field in terms of blocking. But two, he is very sure-handed. He's very savvy in terms of how he can get open. There's guys in round 3, round 4 in this draft. So based on what we saw last summer with the Bills really trying to implement 2 tight end sets, and this is no knock on Quentin Morris. I think they have something in Morris that they can continue to develop. This is just such a special class at tight end that I wouldn't be shocked if the Bills spent one of their first 3 or 4 picks on that position and addressed it here to kind of bolster their pass catching weapons, add another guy that can block, because, you know, it goes back to what Brandon Beane said after the season. We have to protect Josh Allen and do a better job of it. And that doesn't necessarily just mean the offensive line, which they have addressed a little bit here in free agency at the guard position. It could also mean bringing in a tight end that can block and catch the ball.
Victor brings up a good question. He says, why waste an early pick on tight end when the Bills have improved to be able to use in-house talent? Well, so I think that there's been spurts for Dawson Knox. I think you can make the argument that Dawson Knox was much more of a developmental player compared to a Mayer or a Kincaid. I think Washington as a pass catcher, you know, he might have a little bit more room to grow. But I think if you're taking him, to your point, you're bringing him in to really change the dynamic of the run game and then really put teams in a bind with what he can do offensively. But I think one of these guys, this is a different, you know, tier of player. As good as Dawson Knox has been at times, and he earned that contract extension, but these guys are a little bit of a different ilk, if you will.
Yeah, listen, when Dawson Knox came out, the Bills probably fell in love with the athletic traits. The production really, I don't want to say wasn't there, but at Ole Miss, I mean, their wide receivers were the primary weapon, so Knox wasn't featured much there. They kind of went based on what they think he can become, and he's had some great moments. He's become a very solid tight end. You mentioned it, earned the extension. It's funny, I looked recently at the highest paid tight ends because people kind of sometimes complain about Knox's cap hit number. It's hard for me to argue where he's at when you look at who's underneath him, who's above him. It feels like it's about the right spot for him, but bringing in another person that's going to be on a rookie pay scale for, you know, at least 4 years that can help contribute as a blocker, as a pass catcher, give Josh Allen another weapon in a variety of ways. I think that's a win for the Bills if it happens.
A win for everybody watching right now is if you're in Buffalo on April 15th, if you make your way over to Wingnuts, 700 Military Road in North Buffalo. It is going to be the home of the Shout podcast on that Saturday night. And we are going to have an NFL draft preview spectacular with special guest Joe Biscaglia from The Athletic. Ryan, you know, he might even let you rub his head. I don't know. It's like, come on out. We'll have a party. Who knows? Who knows what could happen?
Freshly shaven that day, I promise.
It will be. Okay. When's the last time you had no facial hair?
No. There was one point early in my marriage where I shaved the whole facial hair, and my wife told me I'm never allowed to do that again because I looked like too much of a baby face. Okay. So I cannot and will not shave any, you know, I'll always have some kind of facial hair.
I think for me, it was 2015 was the last time I didn't have any facial hair. So not, you know, I mean, we're coming up on 10 years. I've had the beard. So I think that would shock people if I shaved the beard. It would be a little bit of a weird dynamic. All right. You put out an article over the weekend. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Darnell Wright, one of the top tackle prospects in this year's draft class, is being hosted on a top 30 visit with the Bills. really interesting prospect in terms of versatility, can play left tackle, right tackle. Obviously in Buffalo, I think fans would want him at right tackle, competing with Spencer Brown. But you look at this team right now, and listen, if you draft him round 1, you're bringing him in here to start, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But this team, if Deion Dawkins went down, which he did for a little period of time, if Spencer Brown goes down, you're looking at a very thin roster at tackle. They re-signed David Quessenberry. The draft still needs to take place. Obviously, you get some mid-round guys, undrafted free agents, post-draft too. But Darnell Wright's is kind of like this blue-chip prospect. In terms of where he's going to be, again, the draft is a crapshoot, but I've seen him more times than not in those early 20s, closer to 20 itself than falling into Buffalo's lap late in round 1. I've seen a few scenarios where he's been there, so it's possible. But this would be one of those trade-up targets for the Bills. And, Brandon Beane has been very pro Spencer Brown all offseason. I feel like his tape's gotten better as the year went on. It was something he's repeated multiple times. He pointed out some very valid factors about the back injury, the back surgery, how much time he missed, the fact that he didn't play his final season of college because of the COVID years. He spent that year training instead with Joe Staley, I believe. So, again, it's a lot of reps, a lot of snaps that he's missed in the past few years, and the athleticism is there. The back injuries, the back issues, that would scare me a little bit if I were the Bills. But I don't think it would be a bad idea to take a top tier right tackle or just tackle in general in this year's draft class if he falls into that range, Matt, where you can either go up and get him just a few picks up, or even a luckier scenario would be if he fell into their lap.
And the fact that, like, to your point, like them bringing him in to get to learn more about him just tells you a bit of a story about where they feel like they're at tackle. And listen, depending on what tackle, a crazy idea, like say like a Peter Skoronski, right? Most mock drafts have him going in the top 10. Maybe he slides, and at 15, 16, 17, he's still on the board. And if you're Brandon Beane and you're thinking about, what is the best way to move forward? Let's go out and get a blue chip offensive lineman. You have a 3rd round pick next year to play with right now in the comp formula. Move up, go get a guy. You might not have to do that depending on how the draft plays out. And if a guy like Darnell Wright maybe slides into a maybe more of a feasible range. But I love the idea of going tackle. And I don't think anything on the roster right now is precluding them from going in that direction. The problem I see too, though, is like, there could be a real healthy run at the tackle spot. And then you're left with, where do you feel like the value is at interior offensive lineman? I mean, there's a couple of guys in this draft. Osiris Torrance from Florida is that kind of top guy when it comes to the interior. But there's some other guys, Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin. You have John Michael Schmitz, who's in the mix as well. Some other guard. Listen, the more and more, you read up on Cody Mauch, the more you're just like, whoa, I don't know. Like, this is a guy that if you're in that trade back to the early parts of round 2, that's a guy with, his 3-cone at his pro day apparently was just absolutely off the charts.
Right.
I love that idea of kind of going and getting a guy that played tackle in college, is probably going to transition to guard, but has that maybe flexibility. And then you could kind of figure out, all right, where is everybody best? I have an idea though. Like, I do think, for fans that are concerned about maybe the regression of Deion Dawkins last year, he's going to get a lot of questions about that over the course of this offseason, whether it be in, mini camp or training camp. I have a very sneaking suspicion that we're going to see a bounce back year from Dawkins. And that, I think, solidifies the line in a lot of ways. I mean, David Edwards, a really, really nice addition, in addition to Connor McGovern. You have Ryan Bates in the mix. You're bringing back Mitch Morse. And then it's a make or break year for Spencer Brown. Year 3, I mean, if he wants to get that next contract, he's going to have to not only win the starting job, but keep the starting job. So I think they're in a better spot than maybe even we really think. But I think the fact that the Bills are looking at tackles in the first round type of tackles, I think says a lot.
It does say a lot, but it also says a lot about what has been the formula for these teams that have won it all or been in the Super Bowl. They've had really good offensive lines, and
Right.
there's no right way to go about it. Obviously, the Kansas City model, they traded for Orlando Brown, and now he's on the Bengals, so the Bengals are trying that as well. They've drafted guys, so it's a mix. You know, you can spend big money, you can draft guys early. You can find these players in round 1, round 2, maybe even round 3, and address the line that way. So I like to see the Bills be a little bit more proactive there. In terms of those interior linemen that you mentioned, no one that I would have on the Bills' radar in round 1, but you're right, round 2, round 3, those players that you mentioned would all make a lot of sense for the Bills. Add more legitimate competition to the interior of this line. Bring in someone that has the ability to play center because – you know, Mitch Morris, the concussions are a concern. It is something to worry about. He still has a lot of good football left in him in terms of his age, but he is also not a young player anymore. So it feels like he's been around for a long time, but really when you look at the age, he hasn't been. But still, you always want to have that next man up that you have confidence in. So no issues there. Deion Dawkins, real quick, definitely had his ups and downs last year. I also think it's important to know that you're only as good as the person next to you. And we have talked a lot about Rodgers Saffold and his struggles last year. I think that Saffold's struggles, especially as the year went on, that could have played a factor in Dawkins kind of dipping down as well in terms of his struggles, the assignments, so what needed to be done on certain plays. More times than not, Deion Dawkins has answered the bell when it came to bounce back seasons, bounce back play. So he's earned the benefit of the doubt. But right tackle, there's so many question marks about Spencer Brown from the injury perspective, from the fact that they drafted this guy in the 3rd round based on his athletic traits, just like they did at tight end with Dawson Knox a few years before that. But that doesn't guarantee, athletic traits don't guarantee you that you're going to pan out into some kind of all-pro or top lineman type of players. So I'd rather try to get one of those blue chip prospects if they fall into your lap or if they're in that range where you can trade up and go get them.
No, I think that's an interesting, view of that spot at 27. And it's, I see some comments about like wide receiver, and that's something that we've talked a lot about. And, it's one of the weirdest position groups because even the guys that are really the guys in this draft, it feels like at any point that we're having these conversations, people are cooling on any given guy that week. And it depends on who you're reading. Zay Flowers, you'll read one person who thinks that he is can work at all 3 levels, is this great separator. You got to get him first round talent. There's some people that say, 2nd round guy, nothing super special. It's amazing at the depth in between takes on some of these guys. I think the one bona fide guy in this draft at this point is Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think he's going to end up probably being a top 10, top 12 pick. I can't see him getting past Houston. Beyond that, though, for those that want the Bills to just stick at 27 and take the best receiver on the board, I don't know if I'm there, because if those top 3 guys, maybe 4 guys, if you want to include the who's the kid from TCU, Quentin Johnston. If those 4 guys are off the board, then I think that you have a group of receivers at that point, the Josh Downs of the world out of UNC. You have Rashee Rice, Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed, somebody that we talked about with Chris Trapasso on the show. A bunch of different players. Tank Dell is a guy that really performed well down at the Senior Bowl. I know the Bills, I think, are bringing him in for a top 30 visit. So there's like that second wave of receivers might be a little bit more of a Parker Washington, a guy from Penn State, a little bit of a smaller guy, a lot of small guys in this draft, but can run a little bit. Maybe you push off receiver and you prioritize the line, and crazy enough, Ryan, could that end up being like a defensive lineman, maybe even an interior player?
I don't think it's crazy. And I know, some fans would want to pull their hair if they have any, because, you look at the last few years of draft classes, and a lot of them have been off the edge kind of guys, whether it's Greg Rousseau, who in my opinion has been a hit thus far in his career, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, these early round players, Ed Oliver in the interior. they've gone that route a lot, but there's a need there. There's definitely a need on this defensive line to add more playmakers, add more guys that can cause disruptions, stop the run, get after the quarterback, whether you're talking about off the edge or talking on the interior. There's a need for both. And defensive tackle, there's only so many under contract through, I believe, 2024 or going into 2024 that you probably have to look to add one in this year's draft class. Edge rushers, there's some really good players still out there in free agency, but obviously if they don't go that route with Von Miller, who knows how long he's going to be out in the regular season, you want to address that as well. Make sure you have a solid rotation to kind of protect yourself until Miller is back. So no, I don't think it's crazy, Matt. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Definitely something that fans have to kind of consider as a realistic situation, especially based on free agency and how offensive heavy they were on that in free agency this year. Yes, Taylor Rapp, certainly the most recent signing. Jordan Phillips is supposed to be coming back. He had a picture of his contract on Instagram multiple days ago or many days ago, so that should be announced soon. Obviously brought back Jordan Poyer, but they really attacked the offense more than the defense in free agency. So if it is a defensive player in round one that comes off the board for the Bills, I don't think fans should be surprised.
Yeah, and Sean was kind of asked that. I was actually going back through his transcripts. I think he was asked that at the end of the season, and he was asked, have the Bills prioritized the offense enough, like building around Josh Allen? And he kind of, the quote, I don't have the exact quote, but it was basically like, we put value on the players. Like, they try to go out and get good players, what Brandon Beane has said over and over again. And, they got to make sure that they get good players. They get guys they can trust to come in here and for whatever roles that they fill can compete for jobs. And, one of the things I mentioned on the radio over the last couple of days, doing some hits, people wanting wide receiver 2, right? The Ed Oliver replacement. I think that that's fine to plan for over the net when you're looking at the 3-year window. But if you're looking at 2022 and you're talking, or 2023, and you're talking about this next season, I think Bills fans should be excited about the potential fire lit under Gabe Davis and Ed Oliver. I think they're going into a season where if they don't perform, if Ed Oliver doesn't approach 10 sacks, it's going to hit him in the checkbook. I think that he's going to probably sell out and do anything he can to really increase those numbers. And if all of a sudden he becomes even a version of the force they drafted him to be, I mean, just going back and listening to the way that Brandon and Sean talked about him when they drafted him, that really hasn't materialized on a consistent basis. Then you're talking about a game changer in a lot of ways for this defense, especially against some of those good quarterbacks. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I thought it was interesting. So Cole Beasley has been really active on social media the last couple of days. And one of the things that he said, I even extended an invite to him. He looks like he might want to get into the analyst game. So I said, why not throw some takes around on the old Shout podcast? We'll see if he is interested. But one of the things that he was saying was defending Gabe Davis. And, will he take another step last season? And Cole came back and said, well, he put up better numbers last year than he did any other year. Now, he played a lot more than any other year, so that's part of it. But one of the things that he said I thought was really interesting and makes a lot of sense is what the Bills are asking him to do is different that last season than it was the previous years. They were asking him to play down the field the majority of the time. Stephon Diggs works that intermediate area, the route running technician, the slot does some other stuff, the tight end does some other stuff. Gabe Davis was really pushing things down the field. And he said specifically that it's just a limited route tree. He has a limited number of options as a wide receiver in the offense. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I thought Cole Beasley raised some valid points when it came to Gabe Davis and said this is a guy that busts his butt. He's not going to get worse. He's only going to get better. When people mention, the drop rate, things like that, or their frustrations, that's when he mentioned the route tree. And there's a lot of truth to that in terms of what the Bills expected him to do. It's why he had such gaudy yard per catch stats in some games or over the course of the year, because he was downfield more times than not. And he's shown a knack for that. He's made big plays down the field. In my mind, I always go to that Pittsburgh game from last season, 3rd down. Josh Allen throws the ball to him around midfield, and he catches it and hauls it in for a 98-yard score. He is a guy that can have success there, but it also skews your numbers. So if you can branch out his route tree, so to speak, let him run some of these different routes, he's going to have more success in terms of raising some of those, the drop rate, the catch perspective or percentage, I should say, because they're going to be more winnable catches, more winnable plays for him. Where down the field, it's not always going to be that easy. There's a lot of those sideline juggling catches that he has to make. It's not the easy routine plays that he's been given the opportunities to do. So I thought that Cole Beasley raised some really valid points when it came to Gabe Davis. And like you said, he had more snaps last year, but he did see an increase in receptions and yards. He's trending in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, and he also had to play through pretty significant injury, and so that's going to be one that going into this season. Now he's had lower body issues his entire career, whether it be ankles, feet, legs. I mean, he's had injuries almost every season, so that's something that I think you just got to kind of mitigate with him. But again, I think he's got the ultimate motivation. I think he's going to want to, if the Bills don't extend him before the season and he goes into year 4 having to put up a monster year and then potentially hitting the free agent market or looking at a deal from the Bills, if that's the route they choose to go, it's going to be very interesting because I do think that they view him as wide receiver number 2, even if the rest of the fan base doesn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, how many players have we seen, not just in Buffalo, but across the NFL, where contract year, they rise to the occasion. They put up these monster stats or gaudy stats because they know that their next payday is dependent upon it. And, look at free agency this year, man. There were some good players that are still out there that aren't getting paid the amount that they need. So you almost need to really deliver in that final season, put up great tape if you want to cash in like Tremaine Edmonds did in free agency. Respectively different positions, obviously, but Ed Oliver and Gabe Davis are going to have to do that.
What's your favorite and least favorite part about draft season? That's what we'll end the show on tonight.
I love everything about draft season, if I'm being honest. I guess
you're a draft junkie.
I am. I love it. I love the actual draft nights. I guess maybe the lack of sleep over those course of those days. The last few years, like I know you're up probably even later than I am, but I was up until like 4 a.m. after night 1 of the draft because we're doing our stories. You meet with the players over Zoom in some cases. Now, obviously, you can, they're going to have other options as well. Then you're writing stories based on that. You're getting reactions. You're looking at best prospects available for day 2 of the draft. And there's so much content to put out there that before you know it, it's 4:30 in the morning, and you're just hoping to catch a few hours of sleep before you're right back at it again. So I guess lack of sleep would be my least favorite thing. What about you?
I like the aha moments that you have over the course of draft season, right? Like when you really start to dive into the class and, start to really learn more about specific players, specific positions, maybe hear a nugget on a podcast or read a story or read a nugget in an article. I like those moments. I like as we kind of build the portfolio, the draft portfolio throughout the offseason. The thing I hate though, is there's this gap between like the end of like that first wave of free agency and then almost like week 2 of April, like when all the pro days are done and really everybody then all the draft experts like really put out their big, overarching reviews of all these players. That's when I feel like we really have the full picture of what this is going to look like. And I think there's a lot of things that could change in the next week, like where guys are getting mocked now. I think that, insiders are going to start to hear completely different things over the course of the next couple of days that are going to completely shift mock drafts. And that's part of the fun of it. But as somebody that covers it, I'm ready to get to that part.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I've said it a few times on this pod. The draft is a crapshoot. I remember covering the 2014 draft live at a restaurant with Gene Battaglia and a few other people, and that's the Sammy Watkins draft. And I remember how excited the fan base was. And now you look back at that and you're like, ooh, that was a big swing and a miss there at that time. But the excitement of it all. Fans are gonna rally around whoever is drafted. I know there'll be some upset fans because their favorite player didn't get selected there. But more times than not, there's a big level of excitement to it too that I really do enjoy.
Is Mac Jones turning into the Patriots version of EJ Manuel?
Mm,
It's obviously not a perfect comp because Mac
no.
Jones was like the third or fourth pick in that draft at quarterback, and EJ Manuel was embarrassingly the first. But just in terms of how quickly the mood around the player is changing.
Yeah, how quickly things have soured. I think that's a fair assessment. Now, mind you, with everything with Belichick and the fact that it rubbed him the wrong way that he consulted with Alabama coaches, and I don't blame Mac Jones whatsoever. The coaching last year was a joke in terms of who they assigned and how they assigned these guys to coach up that team. It soured quickly there. Supposedly, the latest story is he's been available for trade. I don't know if there's going to be a market for him, but I think it's going to be a very short leash for him this year, whether it's Bailey Zappi or someone else. I think that the Mac Jones era could be coming to an end sooner rather than later in New England.
Yeah, I think Bill Belichick committed malpractice with the way that he went into year 2 of Mac Jones. And I'm not even a Mac Jones believer or advocate. I mean, I have never really, like, even when he was kind of going off as a rookie for that short stretch, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just think he's limited as a player, and that's nothing against him. It's just he has limitations. I mean, Alabama quarterbacks in general that's not really the model that I want to build my franchise around. But the way you go into year 2, you just didn't even give the kid a chance. And so at this point, it's probably better for him and all parties involved to move on. But I mean, Bills fans have to be excited about the fact that it just looks like an absolute shit show in New England.
It is. And real quick, what are your thoughts on the 49ers maybe jumping into the Aaron Rodgers saga, into the fray? How funny would it be if they did end up getting him, and all this back and forth with the Jets did not come to fruition? It might be a blessing in disguise for the Jets because there's other options, the fact that it's not a 1-year rental. But yeah, that's been the talk on social media today, is supposedly the 49ers, they'd have to really figure out their cap to make it make sense. Could get back in on him. And if they did, they would be the NFC favorites, in my opinion, next year to go to the Super Bowl. I can't say that about the Jets and the AFC if he goes there.
I think the 49ers are probably close to the favorites now. I mean, Philadelphia, I guess. But I just think that there's regression possibility. I like what the 49ers did. Who did they add? Oh, Javon Hargrave. On that defensive line. Mm-hmm. They're the best defensive line in football when it's fully healthy. And so, Christian McCaffrey, I don't know, like I might just roll the dice with Purdy, and I know, like, Trey Lance.
Purdy might not be throwing the football though until August or September. So that's Trey Lance, though, maybe he's the guy. They did add Sam Darnold.
I might even just roll with Darnold. I'd roll Darnold over Aaron Rodgers.
And have the defense. I think that's a little crazy. I think it's a little, I mean, cap wise, it's not crazy because they only have, I think, about $3 million in cap space right now. And obviously Darnold was a much more affordable option, but I guess with that defense, you can lean on McCaffrey in the run game, look to be a game manager. We have seen Shanahan have a lot of success with whatever quarterback he's kind of put in there. So maybe with a pedigree like Darnold's, he'll have success there, but yeah, it's at least an interesting wrinkle as this whole saga with the Jets and the Packers kind of continues on and on.
I this might turn out to be an awful take. And our producer, Anthony, is a huge Jets fan, and he's cheering down there because I think he really wants Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers is cooked. So that's why if I'm the 49ers, I don't want to add that into the mix, because if it doesn't work, he's going to blow up your locker room. I mean, there was so much talent on both sides of the ball in Green Bay last year, and especially on their offensive line. I thought their offensive line was solid. He's going to have a worse offensive line in New York, so good luck with that. He's not as mobile as he once was. He's old. He doesn't even really want to play football anymore, I don't think. I mean, have we been listening to this guy on the McAfee show? The guy just, like, he's ready to just be, like, who knows, like living in dark half the year and, doing all kinds of trips to the moon. And, I think he might even be studying to become a doctor. or something. Like he had a lot of takes on COVID and vaccines. So like that whole thing could happen for him. I don't know. There's a big future for Aaron Rodgers outside of football.
Yeah, he did say 90% sure he was going to retire before the darkness retreat. That's the interesting part. Yeah, when it's that close to 100, probably time to close the door.
Great episode back. We will, I don't know when our next show will be, but we'll always have it posted here on YouTube. And it'll give you kind of that warning. Find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all the audio platforms. Subscribe there as well. Download the show when it comes out if you missed the live edition. And then April 15th, catch us at Wingnuts. Ryan will be there in person, myself, and Joe Biscaglia from The Athletic. We can't wait. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.